Zainab was only 24, a young wife in Mombasa, her heart racing as the first waves of labor gripped her body. The hospital walls felt cold and endless, but she held on to one hope, that Idris, the man she had married with dreams of forever, would stand beside her, holding her hand as their child entered the world. She looked at him with pleading eyes, sweat already dampening her brow, and whispered, "Don't leave me." For a moment she believed he would stay. He adjusted the collar of his shirt, leaned close to her ear, and instead of comfort, gave her words that sliced deeper than the pain in her belly. "You'll manage alone." With that, Idris turned his back and walked out, leaving Zainab gasping, not just from the contractions, but from the betrayal that burned in her chest. Nurses rushed in, trying to calm her trembling hands, but nothing could quiet the storm inside her. Each scream, each tear, each push became heavier because the man she trusted had abandoned her when she needed him most. In that delivery room, Zainab's world cracked open, and something inside her shifted forever. What Idris didn't know was that the door he walked away from that night, the door to her heart, to her trust, to her home, would never open for him again. When he came back, the door he once owned was locked to him. Before the pain of betrayal in the delivery room, there had been a very different beginning. Zainab could still remember the way Idris first walked into her life. He wasn't just charming, he was magnetic. His voice carried confidence. His smile promised safety, and his words painted pictures of a love that would last forever. "I will protect you, Zainab. No matter what comes, you will never face life alone," he used to say, making her heart believe every syllable. He chased her with gifts and gestures that seemed grand at the time. A bouquet of roses after prayers, surprise visits with sweet words, long walks under the Mombasa moonlight where he swore he would give her the world. Zainab, young and hopeful, let herself dream through his promises. She thought she had found not just a husband, but a partner who would stand like a shield around her heart. Their wedding in Lamu was a celebration no one forgot. The island air was filled with music, laughter, and the smell of spiced pulao. Idris stood tall in his white kanzu, his vows loud and confident. "I will honor you, I will care for you, I will never let you cry alone." Guests cheered, and Zainab's eyes glistened with tears of joy. In that moment, she thought her life was a fairy tale written just for her. But reality came knocking far too soon. It started small, money disappearing for reasons Idris never explained, late nights out with excuses that didn't add up. Zainab would find out about debts he claimed were just business, and whispers of lies told behind her back. She caught him more than once twisting stories, yet his charm always found a way to disarm her. "I only want to make you happy," he would say, and somehow her heart softened. Even when she sat alone, staring at bills that Idris had ignored, Zainab chose forgiveness. She told herself love required patience. She told herself all marriages had struggles. Each time, she gave him another chance, believing his promises would eventually outweigh his mistakes. But deep down, a small voice had already begun to whisper, "The man you married is not the man you dreamed of." Still Zainab stayed. She clung to the vows he had spoken so loudly on their wedding day, hoping that one day he would live up to them. She wanted to believe that beneath his selfish choices was still the man who once made her believe in forever. What she didn't know then was that the same man who vowed to never let her cry alone would one day walk out of a hospital room, leaving her in the loneliest tears of her life. And that broken promise would change everything. Pregnancy was supposed to be a season of joy for Zainab, but from the very first weeks it became a test of her strength. The mornings were the hardest. She would wake up rushing to the bathroom, her stomach twisting and turning as she battled endless nausea. Some days even the smell of cooking rice made her gag. Her feet began to swell so badly that her sandals left deep marks, and simple walks to the corner shop felt like heavy journeys. Still, she carried on, whispering to herself that the pain would be worth it when she held her baby. But while her body carried the weight of life, Idris drifted further and further away. At first, she thought he just didn't understand what pregnancy felt like. She would laugh about her sudden cravings, calling him late at night to get her roasted maize or mango with chili. Instead of smiling and rushing out to find it, he sighed, rolling his eyes. "You and your endless demands," he muttered, as though her cravings were a burden, not a miracle growing inside her. Weeks turned into months, and Zainab found herself more alone than she expected. Idris was rarely at home. He spent evenings with friends, loud laughter echoing from the streets as she sat on the balcony rubbing her swollen ankles. Sometimes she heard his voice outside, joking with other men, while she sat in silence, wishing he would remember the promises he made in Lamu. The neighbors began to notice. Women passing by would whisper behind their hands, "She suffers while he shines." Zainab could hear their murmurs, and though their pity stung, she could not deny the truth in their words. Every day her body grew heavier, her back ached, and her heart longed for the comfort of her husband. But instead of holding her, Idris seemed to float above it all, untouched, carefree, living as though he were still single. Nights were the loneliest. Zainab often lay awake, her hands on her belly, talking softly to the little life growing inside her. "Don't worry, my child," she whispered through tears. "Even if your father forgets us, I will never let you feel unloved." Those quiet conversations with her unborn baby became her anchor. They gave her strength when Idris's absence made her feel invisible. Sometimes she would remind herself of the wedding vows he had spoken so loudly, promising protection and love. Yet the louder those memories were, the quieter his presence became in her life. It was as if Idris had fallen in love with the idea of marriage, but not the responsibility of it. By the time her belly was round and heavy, Zainab had stopped waiting for him to change. She knew her journey was hers alone to carry, and though her body ached, a new determination grew in her heart. "I may suffer now, but I will not break." It was a rainy night in Mombasa when the first sharp pain cut through Zainab's body. She had felt small cramps before, but this one was different, strong, deep, and unshakable. Soon another wave hit, and then another, until she could barely stand. Her cries filled the small house, and Idris finally looked up from his phone, irritated. "Is it time already?" he asked as if her pain was an inconvenience. With trembling hands, she clutched her belly and nodded. Idris grabbed the car keys, and together they drove through the storm, the wipers struggling against the heavy rain. Zainab sat in the passenger seat, holding her stomach, sweat rolling down her face as she whispered prayers. She thought, "At least he is here. At least I am not alone." But when they reached the hospital gates, her hope began to crack. Idris parked, walked her inside with quick steps, and then stood there awkwardly as nurses rushed to her side. She stretched her hand toward him, desperate, but instead of holding it, he pulled away. "You'll be fine," he muttered. "I hate hospitals. I can't stand the smell." Zainab froze, her heart sinking even as contractions tore through her body. "Please don't leave me," she begged, her voice shaking with fear. But Idris avoided her eyes. He leaned close just long enough to whisper the words that would haunt her forever. "You'll manage alone." Then he turned and walked out into the rain, leaving her behind. The nurses, shocked by what they had just witnessed, tried to comfort her. "Don't cry, Mama. You are strong," one of them said, squeezing her hand as tears streamed down her cheeks. But Zainab could not stop trembling. Between each scream of labor she sobbed, whispering again and again, "My husband left me. My husband left me." The room was filled with the sounds of monitors beeping, rain hitting the windows, and her cries echoing off the walls. Every push felt heavier because she was alone. Every contraction felt like a punishment for believing in Idris's promises. Yet through the pain she clung to a new thought. "If he could abandon me now, I will never forget this night. Never." Hours passed, and with every wave of pain, Zainab grew both weaker and stronger. She was broken by Idris's absence, but a fire began to burn quietly inside her. He might have left her body to fight alone, but her spirit was waking up. And though she still whispered, "My husband left me," with every tear, she didn't yet realize that the same night that broke her would also become the night she started to rebuild. The hours crawled by slowly, each one filled with sweat, screams, and the sharp sting of pain that made Zainab feel like her body was breaking apart. The contractions came like crashing waves, giving her barely a breath before the next one tore through her. She gripped the sides of the hospital bed so tightly her knuckles turned white, her cries echoing in the room. Every time she looked toward the door, hoping Idris might return, all she found was emptiness. The nurses became her only family that night. One of them, a kind woman with tired eyes, never left her side. She held Zainab's trembling hand, wiped her forehead and whispered, "You are stronger than you know. Don't give up." Those words, simple as they were, gave Zainab a small flame of courage. She realized she had no choice but to fight, not just for herself, but for the life struggling to enter the world. The night felt endless. Between pushes, Zainab begged for strength in whispered prayers, her tears mixing with sweat. She thought of her mother's warm embrace, the laughter of her younger days, the promises Idris had once made and broken. All of it swirled together, giving her both grief and determination. The betrayal cut deep, but it also forced her to dig into a strength she didn't know she had. Then came the moment when the doctor's voice rose above the chaos. "One last push, Mama. You can do this." Zainab clenched her jaw, closed her eyes, and pushed with every ounce of energy left in her. The air was filled with her scream, and then, suddenly, with the sharp, beautiful cry of a newborn. At dawn, the first light of morning slipped through the hospital window, bathing the room in a soft golden glow. The nurse placed a small, warm bundle on Zainab's chest. It was a baby girl, tiny fingers curling against her mother's skin, eyes squeezed shut, crying with all the strength of new life. Zainab broke into sobs, but this time they were not from pain. They were from relief, from joy, from the miracle that lay against her heart. She kissed the baby's damp forehead and whispered, her voice shaking, "You are my light. You are my reason." The emptiness Idris left behind was still there, but it no longer felt like it could destroy her. In that fragile, perfect moment, Zainab realized she was no longer alone. Her daughter's cries filled the silence, covering the sound of absence with the sound of love. She had walked into that night abandoned, broken, and terrified, but she walked out a mother, stronger than she had ever been, holding proof of her resilience in her arms. For the first time, Zainab understood. The strength she thought she needed from Idris had always been inside her. And now, with her daughter in her arms, she would never doubt it again. The morning after Zainab had given birth, the hospital room was quiet except for the soft breathing of her baby girl. She had spent the night watching her daughter's tiny face, memorizing every movement, every sound. Her heart was full of love and exhaustion, but also a deep wound that Idris had left behind. She thought maybe, just maybe, he would walk through the door and apologize, hold their child and make things right. By midday the door finally opened. Idris strolled in, not with urgency or remorse, but with the lazy air of a man returning from an errand. His shirt was neatly pressed, his shoes polished, as if he hadn't spent the night away from his wife and child. He glanced at Zainab, then at the baby in her arms, and the first words out of his mouth were not of wonder or joy, but an excuse. "I had work," he said casually. "I knew you'd be fine. You're strong." Zainab felt her chest tighten. She wanted to scream, to tell him how every contraction had felt like death, how she had cried his name only to hear silence. But instead she swallowed her anger. She simply nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line, while her heart screamed inside. Idris walked closer, but instead of marveling at the little girl, he leaned against the wall, yawning. "Babies are expensive," he muttered. "We'll need money for diapers, milk, all those things. I don't know how we're going to manage." His eyes barely lingered on his daughter's face. He didn't stretch out his arms to hold her, didn't whisper a blessing, didn't shed a tear of pride. It was as if she was just another burden added to his already careless life. Zainab clutched her baby tighter, shielding her as if Idris's indifference could wound the child. She forced a small smile, though inside her soul was cracking. "We'll manage," she whispered, but not for him, for herself and her daughter. She knew then that if she waited for Idris to provide, they would suffer endlessly. As he sat there talking more about money than love, Zainab's mind began to shift. She listened to him complain about responsibility, but in her silence, she was already planning. She thought of ways she could earn from home, how she could stretch every coin, how she would build a life that didn't depend on a man who had proven his heart was empty. That day, as Idris yawned and checked his phone while ignoring the miracle that had just entered their lives, Zainab made an unspoken promise to herself. She would never let her daughter feel the sting of abandonment she had felt in that delivery room. If Idris chose distance, then she would choose strength. And though she said nothing out loud, her silence was louder than any words. Because in her heart she knew, one day, the same man who walked away from her in labor would return to find that the door he thought was his would no longer open. Life after the hospital became a quiet battlefield for Zainab. With a newborn in her arms and little support from Idris, she quickly learned that survival depended on her own hands. While Idris came and went, spending his nights in loud bars and his days making excuses, Zainab turned her small home into a place of work. She began sewing dresses for neighbors, mending torn shirts, and stitching school uniforms. At dawn, when the baby was still asleep, she cooked samosas, mandatsi, and spiced snacks, selling them to people in the market. Every coin she earned, she tucked away with care, like tiny seeds she hoped would one day grow into something bigger. It wasn't easy. Her back ached from bending over the sewing machine, her fingers were rough from cooking oil, and her eyes burned from sleepless nights. Yet, every time she looked at her daughter's face, she found strength to push through. She whispered softly while rocking her baby, "I will give you more than this. I promise you will not suffer like me." Meanwhile, Idris lived as though he had no family to care for. He wasted money gambling, coming home broke and smelling of cheap alcohol. Some nights, Zainab smelled perfume on his clothes that wasn't hers. When she asked where the money had gone, he waved her off with careless words. "Don't worry so much. Things will work out." But they never did. The neighbors saw it all. They saw Zainab walking through the streets with trays of food, her baby tied to her back, while Idris laughed with other men at the betting shops. They whispered again, this time with more pity than judgment. "She carries the weight of two while he plays like a boy." Zainab swallowed her pain in silence. She knew that anger alone would not change her life, so she worked harder. She cooked in the heat, sewed by candlelight when the electricity failed, and saved every coin in a small metal tin hidden under her bed. With each clink of a coin, she reminded herself, "He left me in labor, but I will never let him leave me powerless again." She no longer asked Idris for help. She no longer waited for him to keep his promises. Instead, she built her own path quietly, step by step. Her sacrifices were invisible to most, but they shaped her into a woman stronger than even she realized. Sometimes, in the stillness of night, when Idris stumbled home drunk and careless, Zainab would watch him and feel nothing but distance. The love she once had for him was slowly being replaced by something sharper, clarity. She understood now that she could not depend on him, and she didn't need to, because in her silence, she was building something he would never understand, freedom. And one day when the time came, that freedom would be the key to a new life, and the lock that kept him out. Years passed, and time revealed the truth about Idris. The same friends who once laughed with him in bars, cheered him on at gambling tables, and borrowed his fake charm slowly disappeared. His debts piled up higher than he could count. He owed money to everyone, lenders, shopkeepers, even neighbors he once mocked. Soon, the man who had always walked with swagger was nothing more than a shadow, stumbling through the streets with shame clinging to him. Meanwhile, Zainab's life had changed. With every coin she saved, every dress she sewed, every meal she sold, she built a new foundation for herself and her daughter. She moved them into a modest but beautiful home, one that stood as proof of her silent sacrifices. The walls were painted with her effort, the furniture bought with her sweat, and the roof was held up by her resilience. It wasn't just a house. It was her victory. One night, when the moon hung low and the streets were quiet, a loud banging echoed at her gate. Zainab's heart jumped, and she rushed to the window with her daughter on her hip. Down below, illuminated by the weak glow of the streetlight, stood Idris. His clothes were dirty, his eyes red from drink, and his fists pounded the door like a desperate drum. "Zainab," he slurred, his voice loud and broken. "Open the door. This is my house too." But Zainab stood silently at the window, her daughter resting against her shoulder. The little girl's sleepy eyes blinked at the sound of the noise, but Zainab gently rubbed her back, whispering, "Don't be afraid, my love. This house is ours." Idris grew louder, his voice filled with anger and despair. "You can't lock me out. I am your husband. I am her father." His words rang hollow, echoing against the very walls that Zainab had built without him. Neighbors began to peek from their windows, some even stepping outside to watch. They whispered among themselves, their voices carrying across the street. "That's the man who left her in labor. And now he begs to enter her home." Zainab's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of a bittersweet release. She remembered the hospital room, the pain, the loneliness, the whispered words. "You'll manage alone." And now, here he was, alone in the night, demanding entry to a life he had abandoned long ago. She held her daughter tighter and stepped back from the window. The banging continued, growing weaker with every passing minute, but Zainab did not move. The lock stayed firm, just as her heart had stayed closed to him for years. In that moment, the truth was undeniable. Idris had once walked out of her life by choice, and now he stood on the other side of a door he no longer had the right to open. And Zainab, with her child in her arms, finally felt free. Zainab could have stayed behind the window forever, but something inside her told her it was time to end this chapter with her own voice. She laid her daughter gently back in bed, kissed her forehead, and stepped outside into the cool night air. The sound of Idris's fists on the door grew louder, but when he saw her standing there, calm and unshaken, he froze. Her eyes were steady, her face unreadable, but her heart carried years of hurt and survival. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply spoke with a voice that cut deeper than any scream. "Idris," she said, "you left me when I needed you most. You walked out of that hospital while I was fighting for our child. Do you remember?" He shifted uncomfortably, his drunken courage fading. I made a mistake. I was scared. But I'm here now, Zainab. Please let me in. I have nowhere else to go." She shook her head slowly. "This house is not yours. These walls were built by my hands, not yours. Every brick, every chair, every plate, paid for with the coins you never cared to earn. You never cared to stay. And this child," she paused, her voice firm but tender as she thought of the little girl sleeping peacefully inside, "is not your responsibility. You abandoned that right the night you abandoned us." Idris's shoulders slumped. For the first time, the man who once strutted with pride now looked small, like a boy caught in his own lies. He reached out desperate. "Zainab, please. Give me another chance. Can change. Don't throw me away like this." By now, neighbors had gathered in the street, whispering loudly enough for him to hear. "That's the man who abandoned his wife in labor," one said. Another added, "Now look at him, begging for the door he once slammed shut." Their words stung Idris, but they gave Zainab strength. She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I am not throwing you away, Idris. You did that yourself the moment you chose gambling, lies, and other women over your family. You did that when you chose to walk out on me in my pain. You left me with nothing but tears, and I turned those tears into strength. Now I have everything I need, and none of it includes you." Idris dropped to his knees, his voice breaking. "Please, Zainab, don't shame me like this. Don't let them see me like this." But Zainab stood tall, her voice steady as the neighbors leaned in closer to catch every word. "Shame. Shame came the day you abandoned your wife in labor. What you feel now is only the truth catching up with you." She turned, walked back into her house and closed the door. This time she didn't lock it out of fear. She locked it out of choice. And as Idris's cries faded into the night, Zainab finally felt the peace she had been building for years. Zainab's life after Idris became a story of quiet triumph. She moved to Nairobi with her daughter, carrying nothing but courage and the skills she had sharpened through years of sacrifice. What started as small jobs, sewing, cooking, and selling snacks, grew into something greater. Word spread about her delicious food and her steady hands with fabric, and soon she was running a thriving catering and tailoring business. Her home was no longer just a shelter, it was a place of abundance and joy. Her daughter grew up surrounded not by pain, but by love. She never knew the emptiness of the night her father walked away. Instead, she saw her mother's laughter, her determination, and her pride. She thrived in school, her eyes bright with dreams that reached higher than the skyline of Nairobi. Whenever she asked about her father, Zainab smiled gently and said, "My love, you were never without." Zainab often looked back at the girl she had been in that hospital room, the girl who cried, trembling, abandoned in labor. And she smiled, because that broken girl had given birth not only to a child but to a stronger version of herself. The woman she became was fearless, independent, and unstoppable. Idris faded into the background of her story, a reminder of betrayal but never of defeat. Zainab no longer needed his presence, his promises, or his approval. She had built a life brighter than anything he could have imagined, and so her story ended not with bitterness, but with victory. She would always remember it in one powerful truth: he left me in labor, but I gave birth to strength, and when he came back, strength locked the door.